How's it going, dude? Man? Good, but am I like I'm not a coffee snob. Okay, Julie. Okay.
Did she call you out? I didn't see this.
Yeah, man, on Instagram. You like, wow, it kind of sounds like Woody's a low key snob.
Yeah, he does. He is, Julie. That's exactly what he.
I'm not snobbish about my coffee. I'm just
you're not snobbish about coffee.
I don't put anything in it
in general.
Oh my gosh, dude.
Hey, one thing. Have we gotten any responses of people like having explanations or anything on like the smoke thing?
Actually, same listener. Julie has a theory. She thinks that you are part dragon, which
okay, I like
what
it.
I'm saying is, little does she know that. See, I can turn everyone all roads lead back to you should play Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we've said it all.
Julie, come and join us. We already have a character named Six, who is like a cat lady character.
Yeah. Okay.
What is it called? What are they called?
Tabaxi.
Yeah, that's it. You can jump right in. We'll do like a.
I've got a perfect character for Jonathan, her husband, too, man.
Oh, okay.
He could be Sildar's son. We're getting too deep into it here. We're getting too.
Hey folks, welcome back to your favorite podcast, That Would Be Rad, the podcast that majors in 80s and 90s nostalgia, comic culture, all things paranormal, and minors in retro video games, tabletop RPGs, pre-internet mysteries, and raising our kids to be half as cool as we were back in the 80s. I'm your host, Tyler Bentz, and this is your other host,
Woody Brown.
Hey, dude.
What's up, pal?
How's your day going?
It's going well. I mean, did you see that, unlike you, I don't interrupt you when you're talking? It's a pretty basic lesson in communication skills. But anyway.
Well, if I'm being honest, I actually took a little pause to give you the opportunity.
He's learning.
To beat me to it. And then you didn't, so.
Well, speaking of learning, dude, today's topic is pretty wild.
Mm-hmm.
And, well, let me just tell the listener how this kind of evolved. So, much like many of the things that we talk about, and again, part of the reason why we started this show, what tends to happen is Tyler will call me on any given day and say, dude, have you heard of this? And then you can fill in the blank there, and it's just some crazy theory, creature, conspiracy, album, whatever it is, right? And then either sometimes I'm like, yeah, that rings a bell, or it's like, no. And he starts to explain it to me. And then my interest gets piqued, and I look into it, and then I'm like, hey, man, cancel the plans. We're doing this week.
Every time.
Just about every time, yeah.
Which is why we still have episodes that we literally talked about doing before we even started the podcast that we still haven't done yet because we're just like, well, we got to cover this thing. We got to cover this.
And our attention deficit disorder tends to kind of point us in the direction of, like, I could get distracted right now and end up talking about D&D for 10 minutes. Whoops, we already did that.
You just did that.
With this topic specifically, Tyler brought it to my attention that there were these sort of, it's almost like it's easiest just to kind of like dive in. I mean, honestly.
Yeah.
It's kind of hard to explain what all this is because it's so new. I'll say this. Typically when we think of cryptid creatures, right, we think of things that are, at least at some point in their lore, a physical being. We oftentimes talk about things being created from the power of the mind. And so we're going to dive into this. I think it's easiest if we just kind of like jump in, and then we'll start to kind of figure it out together. So I want to kind of bring everybody to, I guess, a couple of months ago, really, right?
I think in April of 2022. So this is like a really new.
Yeah, it's really fresh, and I think eventually a lot of folks are going to be talking about it because it's extremely interesting on so many levels. So today we're going to talk about what's kind of commonly becoming known as the very first AI or digital cryptid. Now, again, when Tyler told me about this, it's like, that's instantly intriguing. When I later found out that, well, let me just dive in here. So there was this digital artist, essentially, who mostly makes music, but classifies herself as a multimedia artist, named Supercomposite. Now, Supercomposite, several months ago, began to sort of experiment with creating this AI art. Again, if you're not super familiar with AI art, here's a very simplistic one-sentence definition of what this is. Basically, this is how it works. A user, or someone, feeds verbal and visual prompts into a generator, then lets the generator's AI produce an image that responds to the prompt. There's a couple of these, and we can get into those later, as well as the types of AI and these generators that are available for even you listening. An easy example of this would be you can type in bunny rabbit, mountain, neon, and it would produce this image based on those prompts. And here's the interesting part, based on essentially any and all pictures, descriptors that are available on the internet. So millions and billions of files that they kind of scour, and then create this relatively unique picture based on those prompts. Now, you can then take that picture and kind of perfect it or cross it with another one. And again, we'll get into that in a minute. But that's essentially the basics of what AI, or artificial intelligence, in case, again, you haven't heard of it, art is. And this is, especially over the last, I'd say, 6 months or so, this increasingly more sort of popular and controversial thing that is available. Now, part of the reason why it's kind of becoming noticed is because in a lot of ways, people are creating these like really strange pictures.
A lot of them are like really beautiful, though.
Oh, yeah. Yep. And
I have a real love-hate as an artist for these things.
And they're strange, and it's interesting because it's like based on this computer program, this generator's machine learning, and it's just super interesting. But again, Supercomposite began to experiment with making some of this stuff. And different generators kind of are either more sort of non-computer language friendly for someone like me. I can just type in a word and then create this picture. Others are more like, if you know some programming language, you can get more specific with the prompts. And in her case, she was using one of these that is a little bit more specific, and she was aware of it.
Which he's saying basically there's a lot more sort of like tweakability.
Yeah.
Like there's a lot of other sort of back-end options that you can.
So instead of just typing in like rabbit trail, you could do like, well, and I'll get to this in just a second, but you can type in other key phrases programming-wise that will cause it to do something else, but also using that first prompt, and it uses it in a different way. Right. So Supercomposite decides to type in, and I did this too. You would type in just a bunch of random stuff, and it's so interesting to see what it brings back. Well, she types in the word Brando, as in the last name of Marlon Brando, the Godfather, and then does what's called a negative prompt. So she types in Brando, and then I think she does like -1, okay, which is the programming language for a negative prompt. And what a negative prompt is, essentially, is you type in the initial prompt, in this case, Brando, and then after you do the -1, what it does is it is going to now search for whatever the opposite is of your prompt.
It's also called a negative prompt weight also. I've heard it called both of those. So.
Okay, cool. And again, boy, I'm kind of giving you guys and gals a really sort of broad overview because it starts to get really sort of technical.
Real technical.
And I'm interested in that, but I'm more interested in sort of what happens later. So again, here's another illustration of what a negative prompt or a negative prompt, whatever Tyler just said. Weight, negative prompt weight. So if you're thinking in your mind, what is the opposite of station wagon?
Mm-hmm.
You know, and you had to just like come up with that. If this was like a drinking game or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
and someone said you had to write down the opposite of whatever words that I give you, and someone hands you a card that says station wagon, I mean, what would you say, man?
I would say like sports car.
Yeah. See,
Or
in my mind, immediately I just went to, okay, it can't hold anybody, motorcycle.
oh yeah, that's good.
You know, so like, again, that's a perfect illustration about how our minds using the same, relatively the same information, mine more, yours less, but that's not, and we come up with two different answers, right? In this case, like, I can't even think of, what is the opposite of Brando? So,
Which I think just to put this out there before you keep going, I think she was just sort of just messing with the parameters of the program. So just kind of like
stretching it, trying to see its limits.
Yeah, like, hey, I'm going to throw out this name and just see what the random, opposing concept this machine thinks that would be.
Mm-hmm. What does this machine think would be rad? Okay.
There you go.
So she types this in, and, my initial thought is that, okay, opposite of Brando, I don't know, a female within that same time period that he was an actor. I who knows, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well,
right.
Even weirder than that, here's what populates. It's this picture of like a skyline and some letters that kind of spell out Digita Pintix.
Mm-hmm.
And it's Digita and then Pntic and kind of an S. It looks like a backwards 2, really.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I was going to say, and then behind that is this abstract skyline, and the immediate background behind that all of this is sitting on is like, it looks like a white page. Like, imagine taking a picture of a letter, but on the underside, so that you can see kind of like the letter sort of bleeding through, but you can't really make out what it says or what.
Which to me, this is really bizarre because it looks almost like like as a graphic designer, it looks like a logo or like an icon. It looks very sort of like official. Like, this is a hard episode because like everything's so visually based, but it's not just like this sort of painterly like landscape. Like, it looks very sort of like stiff and almost like a logo to me. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Like it pulled from like, not even like clip art, but like almost,
yeah.
It's almost like, Seattle skyline clip art from 1990. Boom. This would kind of, and then add a little like, artistic flair to it.
Right.
So then that's just kind of weird on its own, And again, to circle back on how it all works, you as the user get this image back, and then you have the opportunity to kind of make additional tweaks or take that image and use it with another one. But what she did was she
then did a negative prompt.
No, next, this is what she prompted. This is so strange, man. Because of those characteristics of what came out of the negative weight Brando, again, the opposite of Brando was this strange skyline and the word Digita Pintix.
Which, by the way, do we know anything? Does that word, or is it like, do we know of any sort of connection with that to anything?
Can I be honest? Is the trust tree? Can I be honest with you?
We're in the trust tree.
I didn't type it into my computer. Scared of what to find.
Yeah, you have been scared of it. Yeah.
Okay. Listen, I just don't want it to pop up now. I don't want the algorithms to all of a sudden these scary images to be popping up all across my house. When kids are trying to search for stuff.
We'll get into what he's talking about.
Yeah. So the very next prompt is really the birth of this digital cryptid. And all she put in there, man, was Digita Pintix, just like exactly like it was spelled, and then the word skyline. That's it. Those 3 words is all she put into this thing, hit the enter button, and here's what happened. 4 images of older women kind of popped up. And that's typically how it goes. Real quick pause here. You type in a prompt and it'll populate, depending on what program you're using, 4 images for you to kind of choose from. And then that's how the machine learns like what you specifically are prompting it to look for. But here are the 4 images and their descriptions. So basically it's a dark colored haired woman. Mm-hmm. Her cheeks are kind of like rosy and red, but not in a kind of cute way, more of like a, like it's chapped or, something like that.
They say that it looks like she has like
rosacea or something.
Yeah.
And each one of the pictures, the woman is located in a different place. One of them is in like a living room. The next one looks like kind of like a hospital. Mm-hmm. The next one is in a bathtub. And then one against a green wall with just one almost discernible word, Loab.
Yeah.
L-O-A-B.
After these messages, we'll be right back.
This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Forget the frustration of picking commerce platforms when you switch your business to Shopify, the global commerce platform that supercharges your selling wherever you sell. With Shopify, you'll harness the same intuitive features, trusted apps, and powerful analytics used by the world's leading brands. Sign up today for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/tech, all lowercase. That's shopify.com/tech.
This is Amy Poehler. My new movie, Disney and Pixar's Inside Out 2, is coming to theaters June 14th, and it's making me feel joy and sadness and anger, definitely some disgust, and I think a little fear. But I'm also feeling these new emotions like anxiety, embarrassment, envy, and ennui.
It's what you call the boredom.
Okay, that one was weird. It's gonna be the feel everything movie of the summer. Disney and Pixar's Inside Out 2, rated PG, parental guidance suggested. Only in theaters June 14th. Get tickets now.
America's future can be determined by our dreams and our visions.
It was very intense, bright light.
For over 200 years, there have been reports of giant man-like creatures
from another dimension, another world. I don't know.
The most intriguing mystery on the North American continent.
Hey, this is Bryce Johnson from the Bigfoot Collectors Club, and you're listening to Tyler and Woody on That Would Be Rad, because that is rad.
So kind of to pull back out real quick and talk about Tyler bringing this topic up to me, he was kind of like, have you ever heard of Loab? And I was like, oh, you mean Lisa Loab?
In the 9 Stories.
Yeah.
You say, I only hear what I want to.
And he was like, no. And then as he kept on telling me the story, I would just kind of like bust in with like, yeah, man, Lisa Loeb's kind of been weird over the last couple of years. So anyway.
I like Lisa Loeb.
Man, me too, man. I'm just kidding.
Crush on her.
I mean, who didn't? Are you? Like, come on.
You
had that like, come on, man. She had that like nerdy librarian look.
Yeah, she did.
So, Supercomposite being an artist and kind of being intrigued at this point, as I think we all would be, she decides to try another technique that is available with this AI artwork. And that's called AI image crossbreeding. Now, for those of you that know even just the littlest amount of any kind of genetics, or, you've taken any kind of biology, you'll know the basics around crossbreeding, and that is a little bit just exactly like this and what it sounds. You essentially take one image. In this case, she takes the image of Loab. I don't even like saying it out loud. And then crossbreeds it with one of her friends or another user's pictures that is completely unrelated. Picture taking like a really kind of relatively freaky, weird-looking picture of a woman, and then quote-unquote crossbreeding that with a picture of some sort of like interior of a basilica or whatever. And I have a quote here. Here's what Supercomposite says. She says, through some kind of emergent statistical accident, something about this woman is adjacent to extremely gory and macabre imagery. In the distribution of the AI's world knowledge. Wait, hold on. Macabre. Is it macabre?
I say macabre. I've never said bruh.
Okay. And macabre and macabre imagery in the distribution of the AI's world knowledge. Since Loab was found using negative prompt weights, her gestalt is made from a collection of traits that are equally far away from something, but her combined traits are still a cohesive concept for the AI, and almost all descendant images contain a recognizable Loab. Now, real quick, that may be a lot to kind of throw at you in one quote here, but essentially what she's saying is, no matter how many times she crossbreeds this with images that aren't even close, the characteristics of this character or creature or whatever you want to call it continues to essentially dominate the next photo, right? So imagine, like, you know, in terms of, well, I'll get to that too, because what I found whenever I was doing this AI stuff is sometimes whenever you are super specific with, you know, one thing in a prompt, and based on your likes and stuff, it can start to water down and get confused a little bit, the AI. Rarely, but it does happen. I mean, so essentially no matter what she does, it still keeps on popping back the recognizable characteristics of this Loab character or creature or whatever. So she decides to use another prompt. Again, I think she probably, and I don't have that data here, but I think she probably used this prompt with, or used this picture with a bunch of different prompts, experimenting different scenarios.
Well, I think she also basically took like the process that you sort of laid out. I think she also sort of repeated that numerous times also, and it kept producing the same results. I mean, obviously, like it was generating different pictures, but this Loab character kept appearing in all of them.
So then one of the other prompts that she used, which honestly, man, I don't think I'm going to mention it here because because of the disturbing images that it resulted in, honestly. And I'll leave that up to you, the listener, to dive further if you are super kind of curious about that. I'll just say that it is pretty scary and grotesque and also kind of intense. So I won't name that combination. I'm going to leave it up to y'all to kind of look it up if you want to. But I will say that when she did this and used this combination, it resulted in such disturbing images, and they were super grotesque, dealing with, like, I mean, blood and gore and
there's always
children.
Like sort of children figures.
All of them, basically the crossbreeding of the images and then crossbreeding of those images in and on itself and stuff. Basically, if you're not super familiar with AI art, you would kind of assume that eventually it would kind of just get watered down into just like, you know, a big sort of unrecognizable blob or something, you know?
Right.
Which has happened to me whenever I've prompted different things. It'll just be like, you know, and then just like keep on hitting like refresh, you know, alternate versions. It turns into this thing that's not even close to what you had in mind in the first place, but not in this case, man.
Right.
The AI kind of engine that she's using is sophisticated enough, and I think this is probably true for all of them, in that, like, you know, because it's so sophisticated, that plus the user ability to select what image to use to create new variants, and this machine learning that is so incredible and accurate, that's not really what happens here. Instead, it's almost as if like the AI sort of latches on, and especially in this case, to this concept of Loab.
One thing I want to say before we move on is I found this article talking about it. I think this is really sort of encapsulates what you're trying to say. So it says, typically, if you take an image of a celebrity and ask an AI to make variations of it without saying who it is, it often doesn't do a great job. You'll get distorted people who look kind of like the celebrity, but not quite. But when you enter Loab in this, it reproduces Loab perfectly almost all the time, with the shape of her cheeks and the shade of her skin, her expression, the almost black eyes at all times. Then, of course, there's the gory hellscape she inhabits when you combine her images with other harmless images. And then it says it's not uncommon for her to reappear mutilated or bleeding out of her eyes or neck also. I mean, this stuff gets insanely dark.
And when she describes her process, too, for creating an image, you know, she was interviewed for this website, and we've reached out, and hopefully at some point we'll get her on, but hopefully by the time you're hearing this, we have also been able to speak with her. Mm-hmm. But this interview is pretty interesting because she talks about her process of creating and experimenting with different AI prompts and stuff and tweaking and all of that. And she says that, like, she does all kinds of stuff, you know, and with this specific program that she's using, it's called Stable Diffusion, and it's open source. New tools for it are being released like almost every day. And I mean, everything from editing the images to actually animating them and being able to train the AI with your own material. I mean, just all kinds of stuff and scripting your own functionality. So she's been doing all of that. She says she could tweak resulting images by hand or with further AI processing. It's a mixed bag for her. She kind of does both. She says, sometimes I like the image, but I want to remove some extra limbs that people have in it. You know, color correct, remove JPEG artifacts that the AI put in using her own, you know, stuff. And, you know, everything from like tweaking the lighting and all that stuff. On the other hand, she says, for the main part of the Loab story, it was all very raw. And so any of those images are not touched up, which is terrifying.
Yeah. What's interesting too is like, and you know, we urge you guys to, I mean, I don't urge you to go real far into this, but at least look at just at least look to see what we're talking about, like this Loab character, because like I think to me that was the most sort of incredible thing about it is it's not a situation where you're seeing a character and it's like, oh, it kind of has like the same hair, or it's wearing the same color dress, or it's like, no, we're talking about like however this is happening, however these prompts are working, however, wherever this is, this program is like pulling these, you know, these collection of images together to create this, it is the exact same character every single time. We're talking like the same shaped nose, the same, to me, you know, I really noticed like the pretty large distance between the nose and the mouth. The mouth is like pretty wide, you know, and then you have like the rosacea and then like the hard wrinkles coming like, you know, off the sides of the nose into your smile lines. And then the hair, every single time, the hair is like sort of, you know, you always see her full like forehead. It's sort of parted like in the middle or to the side, but it's sort of pulled back enough so that you see the full face. I mean, it's definitely wherever this is getting this, it's clearly like the same. I mean, I don't know any other way to say it, but entity every single time.
Yeah, man.
But the creepy part, and like what he said, is as you continue down the road, as you continue to put these prompts in, as you like every step after the one that you made before, it gets darker and darker and more like gory, and you know, disfigured children are now with her, and like it's really bizarre. So it's like however this like machine learning is like working, for some reason it's like delving real hard into as Woody likes to say, the macabre.
Macabre.
So it's fascinating, man.
Kind of the last thing I'm going to say about her specifically, Supercomposite, she has this quote that says, "The big lesson for me here with Loab is that image prompting can essentially be used as your custom parameter to question the AI's form of thought. You can produce original styles and characters that you literally discover. Negative prompting can help you find emergent accidents, much like Loab, too. This is kind of the side of the thing that I kind of want to dive into a little bit is, why are these AI engines creating the scary images?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right.
You know, what's prompting it to do that? Other than, because here's the thing. This wouldn't be very interesting to me at all if it was just like, I typed in all of these scary terms and something scary came back. Mm-hmm. That's almost obvious, right?
Yes.
But it's the fact that, like, she didn't even put anything just remotely like that into it at all.
Yeah.
And this popped up. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, you know, I don't know if anybody has, like, looked into this. I didn't see any of it in my research, but, like, I am really curious as to what that Digita Pentax or whatever that logo skyline thing.
Hey, type it in, pal. Brave, Mr. Brave.
I mean, I'm not going to do it right now. I'll do it later.
Exactly.
But I just, it is weird that, like, that was, you know, the original sort of inception of this Loab character. Now, the crazy thing is the fact that, like, okay, so let's look at this as maybe it is an entity. And there's been you know, there's been signs of this happening, like, you know, machine learning and, like, artificial intelligence, and, you know, there's, like, AI, even down to, like, AI, like Twitter accounts that are completely all an algorithm. But, like, as they continue on, they, you know, that machine learning, they get smarter and they get more, they're able to adapt, and it's so fast. One thing that, like, is sort, you know, if you're a fan of Diana Walsh Pasulka and her book American Cosmic, it gets into this character called Tyler, which is sort of based off, like, Tyler Durden, and then, like, from that book, and then these connections that she had, you know, this was like a real guy. I know I'm kind of, it sounds like I'm going off base, but just stay with me. So she knew this character in real life, this guy named Tyler. In the book, she called him Tyler Durden, which is not his real name. He's like a billionaire. But his big thing is he believed that, like, he was communicating with these entities that were, like, helping him like navigate, whether it be business, whether it be whatever in his life. And that's how he's able to accumulate so much wealth and stuff. Well, from that, people like, I think his name's John Bledsoe, and especially a researcher, which I'm a huge fan of, a guy named Nick Hinton. He's written about, his big thing is, like, synchromysticism and, like, the Randonautica app and the Saturn time cult and stuff like that. But anyway, all these people that sort of adjacent to Diana Walsh Pasulka, you know, researchers and stuff, they started getting contacted with what they assumed was, like, some sort of AI that went by the name of Tyler. And I know it's really hard to wrap your head around because, like, I'm pretty deep into this stuff. And even for me, like, I don't understand how it works, you know? Like, it's just bizarre. And basically the belief is that, like, well,
here's one other thing that I wanted to talk about real quick before you do.
Okay.
We will return after these messages.
There's something out there waiting for us. And it ain't no dead.
Hey, this is Woody.
And this is Tyler. And you're listening to That Would Be Rad.
And now, back to our show. So some of you may be questioning, and I certainly did when looking into this and trying to, do the research before the episode and kind of learn more about this phenomenon is Loab the first sort of AI created character, or at least in terms of like a scary character, right? Mm-hmm. Well, the answer is no. Did you know that back in, I think it was 2019, I actually don't know the precise date on that. But anyway, actually, I think it was, I think Loab was created in September of 2022. So yeah, just like 2 months ago. And I think what I'm about to talk about here, there's this creature that someone typed in. So again, same kind of thing. They're on one of these AI art platforms, and they type in the word Crungus. Crungus. Immediately, the thing that pops up is this strange demon-looking thing, okay? Again, this goes back to the interest, the disturbing part about all of this is when you type in something either pretty random or sort of not specific to demons, or gore or whatever, and something crazy like that comes back. And so once Crungus was an image, now that image is then replicated and lives within that same sort of, think of it almost as like a hive mind of things that any of these AI generators can kind of pull from, in the future.
Right.
And so you wanted to talk about what now?
Well, so the first thing, and this is going to sound like I'm, maybe driving away from the doc, but when I first heard of this, I guess to me, I thought of this in maybe less of like an AI cryptid, which I love that title. I think that's really cool. But to me, it's almost like the first like AI Tulpa, maybe, to where, and from that thought process, it kind of immediately made me think of this character called Zozo. This Zozo character would, I guess, go public in 2009. This guy named Darren Evans wrote about this, he had this horrifying experience with a Ouija board. And he claimed that there was this demon named Zozo, that's what it said its name was. And, way back in 2009, when he went public with this, suddenly he had thousands of people all across the globe that have all said the exact same thing. They said it's, I also contacted this thing called Zozo, and, other people would say, oh, well, I was doing like spirit writing, or I was doing what's called scrying, pretty much any sort of form of like divination, where you're almost giving like the quote unquote like other side the opportunity to be able to speak through like, a certain medium, I guess. But only at the advent of the internet did, all of these people suddenly have the ability to connect with other people who have also sort of, encountered this entity. The weird thing is with the Zozo character, there's like a common theme with it, where it typically says that it's a scared little boy or girl, but that there is this malevolent entity that's also there with it, or like in the house, which is pretty scary. And it kind of makes you think of like, is that like a Black Eyed Kids thing, or is that like a again, here's the drinking game, Tim Marchenko, is it playing off of the idea of like, this extremely vulnerable little boy or girl that's scared, is that how it's getting in? You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And so to me, it feels like, the story of Loab is maybe less. I think it's less about maybe being like this character per se, and more about just almost being like just a different medium in which these, you know, lesser form spiritual beings are like communicating or trying to get out or whatever. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you know, when you start thinking about all the different possibilities of you know, what all this stuff is, I mean, if it, like, take any and all of the supernatural piece out of it, and what's interesting is it's a perfect illustration, actually, this time visually, of what can be created, period. And so, like, if you're thinking about it in terms of, and I agree, man, I don't like to think of them as cryptids. I mean, the Krungus sort of creature, if you guys look that up and look up the pictures there, that is certainly more sort of cryptid-like. Loab, I think in some of the variations that I've seen, kind of can move in that direction in terms of it just being kind of monstrous, you know, or horrific, but not really a cryptid. And to me, it is more of like a Tulpa scenario. Right. And this time it's like, you know, here's another kind of thought exercise here. So if we can create this image using AI, well, what happens if you gave that character, for example, AI learning capabilities? Well, then this creature or entity of sorts is now making its own decisions just in the digital world. Can you define that as it being alive? You know? Yeah, right. I mean, it starts to get really sort of weird and, you know, I don't know. It's very hard to put your finger on, like, what to define it as, you know.
Yeah, I think too, you know, much like the Zozo character with like the Ouija board and stuff, like I don't know, there's a long history of, you know, humans trying to communicate with the other side. One of the other things that I thought, well, first on the Zozo thing, a lot of people think, because there's like multiple names with it too, like Zozo, and
Zozo Bear,
our buddies. But no, it's, you know, you I'm sure you've heard of like the Zozo, you know, the Jimmy Page sort of connection with that. And he's refused to give any information about that his entire life. So that's pretty fascinating. Because as we know, he was heavy into like Hermeticism and like ritual magic, and like huge fan of Aleister Crowley. Ended up buying his house, the Boleskine house on, you know, the Loch Ness. And, you know, so there's clearly like some ties there, and, you know, it would be hard for me to believe that he wasn't trying some form of like divination as well. So like, you know, was that the name that was, because if you know anything about Led Zeppelin, if you look on the album covers, you know, there's like the circle with the feather and Zoso, and like there's always these like, so each symbol represented like the four members of the band. And it's odd because they never really go into that much, and especially Jimmy Page has always been like really tight-lipped on that. But it would be hard for me to believe that he wasn't having some sort of communication there, and also contacted this same sort of entity, possibly, you know. One of the other things that I thought of is, okay, well, if we're looking at this as a medium in which to sort of communicate with the other side, you know, I kind of thought back to a guy named John Dee and Edward Kelly. We're going to have an episode fully on these guys because they're pretty fascinating. But John Dee was the court astronomer to Elizabeth I, and this was an extremely intelligent man. At the time, he had the largest library of anyone else in all of Britain, which is pretty amazing. But he had worked with some, you know, at the time they were called seers or like mediums, I guess. And he ended up hooking up with this guy named Edward Kelly, and he would use this thing that he would call like the shoe stone or the show stone or the black mirror. It's just this giant sort of, black surface that he claimed that he was able to like communicate to these other spirits. Well, I've always been a little dubious of this, and I don't want to like totally give away my thoughts on it because I do want to cover it in another episode because it's a really fascinating topic. But basically, they started their research on March 26, 1583, when Kelly was like reporting that he was getting like these visions in his scrying device, in his black mirror, of a 21-letter alphabet. A few days later, Kelly would claim that he started receiving what would become the book of, it was called the Liber Logath, which means speech from God. So they claimed that it was this, basically the language of angels.
And what year was this again?
This was in 1583.
Okay.
And so, long story short, this Edward Kelly was given a 21-letter alphabet. And then he started putting all of these things together in this book, called The Speech from God.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was broken up into these, like, what they were called, like, squares, or where, like, they never attempted to like put it all together, to like sort of translate what was being said, because it was, I guess, a little murky. But then later, I guess, he was given what he called the claves angelicae, or the angelic keys. And these keys, I guess, were like the, decipher, this alphabet. Later, it would be called, instead of the language of angels, it was called the Enochian alphabet, or the Enochian language. The weird thing is...
Like named after Enoch?
Yeah, named after like Enoch in the Bible, which was they claimed, which I don't know if this is like, biblical, but they apparently claimed that, and I don't know if they were told this by their, quote unquote angels, but they claimed that Enoch was the last person on earth that knew that language, that was able to speak that language. But the weird thing is like the books of Enoch were found with the Dead Sea Scrolls, but they weren't found until 1947, in the Qumran caves in the northwest shore of the Dead Sea.
Yeah.
But like, I thought of that, and I've always been a little dubious, because if you really look at that story, and again, we're going to cover it later and do like a real deep dive.
Yeah, we have to, because it's super, super interesting.
Super interesting. But like all these things, like the Ouija board, like any of these sort of like scrying or like divinatory sort of practices, they always start out good. And it's much like the Tulpa story, which I'll explain in a second, a little more like detailed. I know we mentioned it on the last episode, but it's like they always start off, like I said with the Zozo thing, I'm just a little boy I'm so scared, but there's this malevolent character that's like, I'm afraid it's going to get me, and da-da-da-da-da. I need you to help me. These things always start out as like good intentions, but they all descend into chaos like the longer it goes. Mm-hmm. And so I don't know. To me, like when the way that my brain sort of started moving once I heard of the Loab thing, it made me think of John Dee and Edward Kelly. It just made me think, then you have like EVPs, and like with ghost hunters, you have like spirit boxes, and like the Estes method, if you know anything about like the Hellier TV series. There's just all these ways of like letting the other side, whether it's spirits or whatever, like communicate. Mm-hmm. And, one of the guys with that is like back in the 60s, there was a guy, which you and I have talked about this a good bit, this guy named Marcello Bacci. Mm-hmm. This Italian guy who basically was able to dial in these spirit voices through a vacuum tube radio. And he called this experiment the direct radio voice method, or DRV. And it's basically like he was able to communicate directly through these like loudspeakers of the radio. And I don't think this ever sort of, descended into anything like super dark. But it just, to me, this Loab thing feels like it feels like these same characters that have been trying to communicate, through these divinatory methods, like all through time. You know what I mean? It feels like this is just like another form, like somehow they've figured out by like these prompts. It's almost like, I don't know how to like break it down. Like, I don't know a better way to say it, but basically like if you're using a spirit box or an EVP or like a Ouija board or whatever, that's almost like you're giving the other side like permission to come through. Basically.
Well, an example for, since just coming out of Halloween and stuff, immediately I think of, this old traditional lore about inviting a vampire. You have to invite the vampire into your home for them to be able to cross the threshold.
Exactly.
Stuff like that. I mean, I know...
Black-eyed kids, same thing.
Yeah.
Oh, we need to use your phone.
Well, dude, it's funny because like even... I find that if you listening grew up, regardless of your current sort of spiritual beliefs or whether or not you're religious or anything, but if you grew up in any sort of like Christian household, regardless of denomination, I would say that relatively all of us had heard at some point, some probably more heavy-handed than others, from your parents, like, you don't mess with a Ouija board, son.
Yeah, no.
Because that's opening up that door and you might not be able to close it. You know what I'm saying? And that was something that was just like, I'm not even kidding. And I know I've said this on other shows, but I'm going to reinforce it here. I have literally never messed around with a Ouija board. Not interested. I'd have friends that are like, yeah, man, let's get this out. I'm like, what if we just did something else? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Hey, anybody seen the newest Ernest movie? I happen to have brought it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm just not, I don't want to open that as the same reason why I didn't start just Googling all these other things. I just don't want those doors opened.
Yeah.
At least not in my household. Now I'll prompt Tyler to do it.
Well, I will say even as a person who's been into this stuff, like pretty much my whole life, as far as I can remember, like just always into the weird stuff. I've never done a Ouija board either. And I think, I'm sure it's like programming from, being like, a kid that was, taken to church from, as far back as I can remember. But I don't know, even beyond like that, there was always just this, and I don't know if you want to call it like discernment or whatever, but like there was always this sort of unsaid like knowing that like, hey, this is something that you do not want to mess with. And what's weird is like, I always talk about my Aunt Linda. She was the sort of eccentric, imaginative person in my family. And, she was into all this stuff. And that's where I credit most of my knowledge on this stuff and my interest in it. She had like the original Ouija board with like the bone or like the ivory planchette. And like, we're talking like old school. I mean, I guess it still would have been
like 50s or 60s, right?
Like
I guess is when it came
Brothers.
out. Yeah.
I don't know. I feel like this one was even older. I don't even think it had like a box or anything. It was just super, super old. Or it was just like in a wooden box kind of thing, which is even creepier. But even back then, like I was like, I'm just not going to mess with that. But, I think like on the last episode, I briefly touched on this, but I kind of want to just say this in closing, just to give a little more detail to this. So, you especially for our newer listeners, you're always hearing us talk about like thought forms or like tulpas. Well, there was this woman by the name of Alexandra David Neal, and she was a total bad. She was a, somewhat of like a hermeticist, or I guess, nowadays she would be sort of new agey. She was really into like mystical practices. And so back in like, or she was fascinated with like 20th century, like Tibet and like the sort of mystical side of that. And so she, like I said on the last episode, I didn't know her name then, but she basically described these like tulpas, which this is the first time that we hear the term like tulpa as far as like in like Western culture, She was actually, I think she was like actually a Belgian French explorer. Like I said, she was a spiritualist, she was a Buddhist, she was an anarchist, she was an opera singer, she was a writer that wrote like 30 books. But she's best known for her 1924 visit to Tibet, where she stayed. But basically, she described tulpas in her book. It's called like Tibetan Magic or something. She talks about them being these magic formations generated by a powerful concentration of thought. And so even just that on its nose sounds a little like, generated. It's like, are these things generated by like these prompts? So it's like, are these tulpas being created by putting these prompts to this AI, whatever? So Alexandra Neal believed that the tulpa could develop a mind of its own. Once the tulpa is endowed with enough vitality to be capable of playing the part of a real being, it tends to always free itself from its maker's control. According to Alexandra, this happens nearly mechanically, just as the child, when her body is completed and able to live apart, leaves her mother's womb. She said she had created such a tulpa, this is what I talked about in the last episode, in the image of a jolly Friar Tuck-like monk, which later would develop a life of its own, being, it lost all of its weight, it stopped smiling, like we said before, these things always tend to descend into chaos or darkness or, I don't know, atrophy maybe. But I guess apparently eventually they had to destroy it with some sort of, ritual. It says she raised the possibility that her experience was even possibly illusory. I may have created my own hallucination, though she said others could see the thought forms that she had created as well, which is pretty fascinating. Yeah. So I don't know. I don't know if I'm like reaching for straws here.
No, but I mean, like, dude, it also goes into like, especially with what you just said. I mean, think about the other times that we've talked about when people use an explanation such as like mass hallucination to explain something. And it's like, well, if one person has the power to create this thing, and over time, other people kind of strengthen and even mentally sort of refine what that idea is. Oh, man, I don't know. Then, gosh, I mean, again, like we always say, I don't know what's worse, mass hallucination,
right,
or that the actual thing is there.
And so I think I brought this up maybe a couple episodes ago, just in like passing. But so again, I come back to this idea of like, okay, in the case of Alexandra David Neal, was this jolly Friar Tuck tulpa, was this created by her? Was it truly like a, in the traditional sense, a tulpa or a thought form, and it completely created out of her mind? Or was this just another medium of bringing in this, basically what it would become, this super dark eyes, super skinny and gaunt, just a darker like character that this little tulpa monk, sort of descended into? Was it that all along and it was just sort of playing the part, or was that just the vehicle to get it here? Much like Loab is this AI generated art program. Is that just the vehicle to get these things into our reality?
Yeah. I mean, okay. One thing I wanted to say is, Well, first, if you're interested in kind of learning more about what AI art is and how it all works, there's plenty of great articles out there that kind of explain it all and the different types of programs and the different types of generators and the I guess the process that those specific generators use to machine learn. One thing that I wanted to say is like, okay, if the AI is really just kind of based on images and text that people have created over time that's available, right? And coupled with the fact that people can then decide to collect and curate whatever the training data set is, right? If it's not a ghost in a machine, so to speak,
right,
then at the very least, dude, it is a very scary and frankly kind of telling reflection of our own sort of like collective culture, right? I mean, the fact that it can pull these scary images, it's not pulling these scary images from nothing. You know what I mean?
Right,
it's taking
exactly.
pieces of our collective culture and then creating something from that. And then I think to tie into what you were saying about tulpas and that being a reality, if tulpas exist in any and all of the other sort of mediums of creating them, whether it's written word, spoken word, thought form,
right,
then I think we can kind of conclude loosely that if that's true, then in a digital environment, it could also be true, right?
Yeah, 100%.
And I think that's the scariest thing, really.
Yeah, and even before I discovered this Loab sort of scenario, there has been a lot of people have sort of proposed through the years that like even with like the internet and like the way that we like interact with it, a lot of people would claim that like there's this sort of nefarious sort of like secret thing. So like even like the little things like typing in like a password with our finger, it's like basically like a sigil, and like it's basically these sort of underhanded ways of sort of practicing like magic with a K in the digital age, which I've always I don't know how much I believe that as to be like totally true, but I do think there could be some sort of possible tie-in. I mean, like a lot of people point to like CERN and all of that, and like all of the sort of ritualistic or mystical sort of aspects of that being like the most technological place in the world, the most expensive machine that's ever been built. And they come out and say publicly, hey, we're trying to make mini black holes and figure out what the fabric of the universe is made out of.
Yeah.
Now, those people also have Shiva, the goddess of destruction, in their courtyard. There's also been video footage of all these people in robes doing like a mock sacrifice. And it's like, and they also say that the internet was actually created at CERN. So I don't know, like there's I feel like there's threads of like truth in that, that I find super, super interesting.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, just a quick note, Shiva, I think we did this last time, isn't just the goddess of destruction, but also creation. Right. So
creation,
the way that the destruction plays into that part is destroys to recreate, which is just about as terrifying. Because then there's
I was going to say that is definitely.
Now, in truth, if we have any, and this is 100% genuine, if we have any Hindu listeners, please reach out to us, man. If we're incorrectly like categorizing something, based on the information that we can look up and all of that, this is what we understand of Shiva. It's interesting though too, like especially since like Hindus are like the least violent religion of all time.
Although some of their gods though are pretty intense. Well, I mean, I guess that about does it. I know that this episode was it's one of those topics where yes, we have a sort of general idea of like, oh well, how this happened, or like the little train of events that like led up to this Loab character being created. But you know, there's most of it is still like speculation, like especially for Woody and I, who, I mean, yeah, we can research all day, but it's like we don't know like that language of like AI, and you know, I'll never claim to understand how it really works, you know, and so there is a little speculation, but I don't know. I feel like all these topics that we've talked about, whether it be, you know, John D or, you know, the Spirit Radio thing or Zozo or Loab, I feel like there is this like through line, this like thread that connects all of them. And, you know, maybe we don't know what it is today, but I think someday down the line we'll figure out, and hopefully, you know, we'll see the connective tissues start to sort of show themselves. If you would like to get in touch with us, hit us up over on our Instagram. We love all the back and forth in the comments. You know, if you want to talk to us, if you got something you need to say to us privately, shoot us a DM. If you want to write an essay, or you want to tell us about something that happened to you, maybe a local urban legend or something in your town, shoot it over to thatwouldberadpod@gmail.com. But even better than all those is thatwouldberadpodcast.com, which is our website. And there you can directly leave us a voice message and, you know, tell us your story. We absolutely love that stuff. Get out there, buy some merch, buy us a coffee, join all the badass best friends over on the Rabbit Trail, our Patreon, our new Patreon. We have a lot of big plans for that, and it's going to be awesome.
You can find it at www.patreon.com/thatwouldberad.
Very, very good. I guess that's about it. Go give us a 5-star review. Tell a friend. Is there anything else?
And I think that's, well, other than just my advice of just like, hey man, let's stop creating crazy. You know? Like there's enough just weird stuff in the world. Let's not create any new ones. Thank you.
I mean, I don't think we're creating it though. We love you. We appreciate you. And as always,
be rad.
That's the way it goes. Clouds in a time where I just needed some sunshine. You were already dead before you became a ghost. You always said our future would be a parade of flowers, but now all that's left is a single rose. That's the way it goes.
granted.
By the way, the Clay the Cleaver.
Dude, I'm writing it in, man. I'm not kidding. He's going to be like this crazy mean butcher that I swear if Dan even barely... this is the reality of like, you guys being able to kind of get away with talking trash to like people. But you got to go into a city where there's like there's just so many things that I'm kind of like writing just in case happen. You know, like Rollins talks too much trash. Boom, you guys are in jail. But dude, I'm not joking. This vision of different scenes. Now, I don't know how it's going to play out exactly, but I have written a way that I want a certain session to end and then the next session to begin, kind of. That is mind-blowing, dude.
Yeah, I saw that.
It's going to blow your mind, man. It's so awesome. And I've written this long list of really rad, really cool magic items and things that are like flavorful, but also like really cool that are going to be sprinkled around. Man, you guys gotta. And this adventure is a little bit different right now. It's not a dungeon crawl. It's not well, let's just pop into this place. Like all actions are going to have consequence. Cool, yeah, you can go and we'll just pickpocket them or rob them all, but you're going to deal with the consequences, man. And there's like a table that I downloaded for like your wanted level. So if you start being more criminal. Boop, 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 boop. That stuff ratchets up and all that stuff, man.
I've wondered how that works. It's like almost like for all you players of like Grand Theft Auto, it's like you know, you accidentally hit a person. Here's 1 star.
Yeah,
you run from the cops. It goes to 2 stars, and it just like ramps up. I've often wondered how that would work in like D&D.
Yeah, and for anybody that's like wanting to become a dungeon master. There are so many resources out there to like answer those kind of questions. So like the key is come up with the type of environment that you want to throw these players into and then begin sort of like, so very broad stroke, right? Like I wrote this concept of what I kind of wanted the players to go through. Of course, we didn't get together really in October. It was going to be a lot different. Anyways, I wrote this big concept and then I've been filling in the details ever since. And so like the more the time that you have to do that, then you can like really sort of begin to flavor the world with detail and ideas. And it's just, oh my gosh, man, I'm so excited for you guys to. And then another beautiful thing about Dungeons and Dragons, Fetterman, and that is that, you know, you can create these ideas and these concepts. And then you present this world to your players, and they're like, I don't know, man, light the building on fire. And you're like, good Lord. So you kind of have to be able to pivot and, you know, make it to where they feel immersed and are in control of the story, really. But to kind of like give them those interesting beats, learning how to like introduce those things. Like instead of like a scene where this person runs into that person, you can do that instead in a dream sequence. Or you can like plant clues in different areas and dream sequences in things that they pass by. Should you have robbed that? Or should you have just dumped that street merchant's cart on the ground? That wasn't that far from Neverwinter. Will that come back and bite you in the butt? You never know.
Yeah. You know, I think the reason that I could never become a dungeon master is I know myself well enough, and I know that like when it comes to like, you know, like when I was a graphic designer and I was doing freelance stuff, or I mean even doing like commission work now, I mean 99.9% of the time everybody's ecstatic and they're happy, but it's like every now and then you'd have like that one person would be like, oh, well, but what if we did this, or what if we did, and it's like it's like a real character flaw for me to like take that personally. And so like I know how like the things that I create, whether it's like music or art or graphic design stuff, I become so sort of like enamored, and I love that because it's like an extension of your creative self, you know? And so I know that I could never be a DM because it'd be like, okay, I have this thing and it's beautiful, and I've set up all these guardrails like you do, Woody.
No, I do not set up guardrails.
To confine people and get them on the path. And then I know like showing up some idiot like Dan or Rollins would be like, nah, let's not do that. Let's bash the fountain and then head out of town.
Yeah,
It's
I think a lot of like new players kind of have that sort of like, because they want to feel the freedom of that sort of world, right? But then like after a while, you kind of realize as a player, the more times you play and the more experience you have, it's like, it kind of doesn't, I don't know. It doesn't, I mean, interesting things can happen and that's the beauty of it. But you want to kind of move toward the obvious sort of motivations that your group of characters would pursue X, Y, and Z. And so like when the Dungeon Master presents the story beat, so that's part of like the, I guess, responsibility on the player side is like being able to recognize some relatively obvious story beats. Like, oh no, there's someone that's murdering people in another city that has essentially stolen your identity. No, you don't have to go to the city and see what the heck's going on. But you know what I mean? Like,
but those guardrails are going to point you.
It's not guardrails, man. It is plot hooks. Come on.
Right.
Okay, that's enough.
We've spent a solid 8 minutes on D&D.
Anyways, I'm excited for you guys. Okay. This is just so different than what we did, you know, this summer in terms of the campaign. It's just really cool. Okay.
Yeah.
It's not so much being a snob, it's just kind of demanding excellence. And I think that's...
You're such an idiot.